Welcome to Off the Wall. My name is Trey. Thank you so much for joining me today. We've got a relatively small show in store for you today, primarily talking about the IFL National Championship, which is taking place on Saturday, August 17th, 4 Eastern, 3 Central in Henderson, Nevada, between the Massachusetts Pirates and the Arizona Rattlers. We'll dive deeper into a preview of the game where we'll talk about the strengths and weaknesses of each team and what we can expect out of this game. And I'll give my prediction. My picks have been bad. I'm just warning you now. So it could be a kiss of death for whichever team I end up picking. So we'll see what happens. But before we dive into that, if you can give us a follow on all of our socials at Off the Wall FB, F as in foot, B as in ball, Off the Wall FB. We're on Instagram, we're on X/Twitter, and we're on TikTok. So if you give us a follow on each of those, we'd really appreciate the support. And you guys have been great all throughout the entire arena and indoor football season. And we've been growing this thing out and looking forward to seeing how we can keep this momentum going into the arena off season, which is the outdoor NFL normal season. So we'll try to keep it with some arena and indoor content as much as we can and keep this thing going because I've been having a blast with it and been able to connect with some really cool individuals. So we'll see how that goes. Well, let's not waste any more time. Let's dive right into it. The IFL National Championship. So the National Championship played this Saturday is actually going to be a rematch of the 2021 IFL National Championship between the Pirates and the Rattlers. That game in 2021 was actually in Arizona. This was before the games became neutral site. So this will be a rematch, but not exactly the same way. It'll be at a neutral site this time in Henderson, Nevada, which is the home of the Vegas Nighthawks. So the Pirates, they kind of stumbled into the playoffs after a fast start to the season, while Arizona started pretty poor and really got hot through the end of the season. So it's a tale of two very different stories with these teams. And there's some fun little tidbits that for each team heading into this one. So big shout out to Sports Coast to Coast. They're a great follow on Twitter/X. If you don't follow them already, they are at SCTOC, Sports Coast to Coast, at SCTOC. They provide some really good tidbits in some of their articles that they post on some of their forum boards. So here are some of my favorites from an article they posted a little bit earlier in the week, which I'll link below in the description. Dalton Snead could be the second quarterback in IFL history to win a championship with two different teams in 2 consecutive years. Last year, Dalton Snead was the quarterback for the Bay Area Panthers when they won it all. This year, he's the quarterback for the Arizona Rattlers. He has a chance to do something that's only been done once before in the entire history of the IFL. So that's a neat little storyline there. And then Dalton Snead is also 0-3 against the Pirates in his career. So hasn't beaten the Pirates so far throughout his career, but the Pirates are also 0-3 against the Western Conference in 2024. So something's got to give here. Either the Pirates are going to get their first win against a Western Conference team, or Dalton Snead's going to beat the Pirates for the first time in his career. And you know, we love doing betting picks here, at least guessing what the betting lines will be on the show and then blogging some picks later on in the week. When we're talking about teams that are against the spread, we've had some teams that were outstanding against the spread. Both of these teams are as average as it gets. We're talking Arizona being 9-9 against the spread, and then Massachusetts being 8-9-1 against the spread. So Arizona is 7-6 against the spread when made the betting favorite. Meanwhile, Massachusetts is 4-0-1 against the spread when made the underdog. So we've got a lot of different things going on that could tell the story of how this game could play out. But starting with Massachusetts, like I said, they start off the season really hot. They start off 5-1. They looked really good on defense and on offense to an extent. It seemed like they were going to take some time to figure things out on offense, but the defense was playing really well from the jump. But then they ended up finishing the season 8-8. So starting 5-1, finishing 8-8, and just kind of limping into the playoffs. If they were in the Western Conference, they may not make the playoffs based on how they finished the season. So they ended up being the 3 seed, and they just got white hot at the right time on offense and took it to Frisco and then absolutely destroyed Green Bay in the Eastern Conference Championship. So from May 11th to June 15th, they only won 1 game. So it was a very tough stretch of about a month and a half, 2 months for Pirates fans, where I was like, man, this team is so much better than how they're performing right now. Like on paper, the team is just unbelievable on offense. They just couldn't quite get it together, whether it be due to injuries, whether it be due to just bad matchups at the wrong time. Just things couldn't go their way, but they made the dance and they made the best of it because they're in the IFL National Championship right now. And when we're talking about the strengths of the Pirates, it all starts with their running back. They're all IFL first team running back, Jimmy Robinson. He leads the team in rushing yards, he leads the team in receptions, and he leads the team in total touchdowns. So he has over 2,500 total yards on the year. 1,100 rushing yards, 457 receiving yards, and over 1,000 kick return yards. 2,500 yards, over 2,500 yards on a 50-yard field. That's going up the field and down the field 25 times. 25 there, 25 back. That's a lot of yardage on a 50-yard field. So they're not afraid to feed him the ball and give him as many touches as possible. And that's when their offense thrives, is when he gets fed the ball early and often. But like I said, over 1,100 rushing yards on the year. We're talking 4.7 yards per carry, 31 rushing touchdowns, and the offensive line blocks really, really well. And they get excellent downfield blocking from their wide receivers. So their wide receivers are known to make big plays in the passing game, but they are very, very strong when it comes to run blocking. And Jimmy Robinson doesn't need a ton of help, but when you have an offensive line that's able to spring him loose for the first 5 yards, and then wide receivers that are blocking downfield to get him another five, six, seven, he's so shifty he could turn that into a house call at any given moment. So he is just an unbelievable talent, and someone I hope we see get a chance at possibly the UFL or the CFL next year, just because he is so shifty and so talented, and he's just by far the best running back in the IFL. But then another strength of the Pirates is their defense, but more specifically their secondary. So about midway through the season, maybe not midway, a little more than midway through the season, they brought in Frederick Griggs, who was the head coach for the Duke City Gladiators, who didn't have the best season, but they brought him in as a defensive backs coach. And right around that time, things started to change for the Pirates. Before they brought him in, they ended up signing 3 DBs over the course of a month. So they brought in CJ Holmes on June 12th. They brought in Paris Ford on May 19th, and then Cyrus Fagan on May 8th. You look at those 3 signings that were signed mid-season, those 3 players have been playing outstanding football in the playoffs, and they are the reason why the Massachusetts Pirates defense has been so suffocating, specifically in that Green Bay game where they were just all over Green Bay, forcing 6 total turnovers on the day, 2 picks, 2 fumbles, 2 turnovers on downs. They just would not let Green Bay get an inch. So you mix in those 3 DBs signed midseason, plus NFL veteran Matt Elam in that defensive backfield, and they're just a very physical, strong secondary that is a problem for any wide receiver group that they face. And they're going to be facing a pretty good one in Arizona. So it's going to be a very interesting matchup between the secondary that has been playing very, very strong versus this wide receiver group for Arizona that has also been playing very strong. But like I said, the secondary is tough. They're physical. They blanket the wide receivers, but they also rack up a little bit of penalties too. That's part of it, where they play physical, they play in your face, they play through the echo of the whistles, so to speak, but they end up getting penalized a lot. But through the playoffs so far, it's been a net positive for them, where the positives of that physical play have far outweighed the penalties that they accrued. So I think we'll see a lot more of that physicality from that secondary. And this might be a low scoring game to start off, as both teams kind of feel each other out. The Massachusetts offense hasn't been at their best all season. They only eclipsed 50 points a handful of times, but they were able to do it twice in 2 games in the playoffs. So they're starting to heat up at the right time. And all throughout 2024, they were just above 50% on third down conversions on offense. And then the thing with Massachusetts is that they didn't have to light up the scoreboard all year because their defense played so well. On defense, they gave up less than 200 yards a game at 199.8, so just under it, which is good for second in the IFL. But then on fourth down conversions, they only gave up 37.8% of fourth down conversions, which was first in the IFL. So they really tightened the shoestrings a bit on fourth down and third down, and they sometimes do a bend but don't break, but sometimes they don't even bend when it comes to that defense. So they've just been playing unbelievably well on the defensive side of the ball, and when paired up with an offense that's catching fire at the right time, this Pirates team is very, very dangerous. But if we're going to be talking about weaknesses, like I said, penalties are the weakness of this Pirates team, and they have been all year. They are the most penalized team in the league by far, and oftentimes you see those penalties extending drives for opposing offenses. So the defense is playing exceptionally well, but they're actually playing a little bit better than what even the stats show and what the final scoreboard may show, because sometimes they have some boneheaded penalties that extend drives. So, but like I said, it's the good with the bad of that physical play that they do on defense. And I've been super impressed by Massachusetts in these two playoff games. I wasn't a believer heading into the playoffs, but they've sold me, and I'm very excited to see how they match up with the Rattlers. But then we flip it over to Arizona. They're the opposite of the Pirates in a couple different ways. The Pirates started off very hot and kind of stumbled into the playoffs. Arizona started very poorly and got hot at the perfect time and ended the season on a what 10-2 run to get into the playoffs in the Western Conference, which was no joke. Like they finished 11-5, but didn't clinch a playoff spot until the last week of the season, which is just crazy. But when we're talking about the strengths of this team, it starts with Dalton Sneed at the quarterback position. Dalton Sneed got hurt in game one of the season, and he didn't play for 4 or 5 weeks. And that's why they started off so rough. They went through a couple different quarterbacks, including Lorenzo Brown Jr. and Garrett Kettle, before Dalton Sneed eventually got fully healthy and took the reins for the rest of the season. But when Dalton Sneed starts at quarterback, Arizona is 11-2 this season. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good win-loss record. But when we're talking about the strengths of the Arizona Rattlers defense, it starts with Sneed and this very efficient offense. When we're looking at like efficiency and total yardage per game, they average 248.7 yards per game, which is third best in the IFL. But then they also average just under 49 points per game, which is good for fifth in the IFL. And not only is this offense efficient, but they're very balanced as well. They can beat you on the ground, but they can also beat you through the air. And on the ground, it starts with their two-headed rushing attack of Shannon Brooks at running back and Dalton Sneed at quarterback. When they run that read option and they get things going, they are a dynamic duo. Shannon Brooks is averaging 40 yards per game and has 30 rushing touchdowns on the year. Oftentimes is just an absolute animal in the red zone and is tough to take down. But then Dalton Sneed's averaging 26 yards per game. He's got 14 rushing touchdowns, and that's missing some time early on in the season as well. So if they get within like 10 yards of the end zone, they start running that read option. It's kind of a pick your poison situation where, all right, are you going to take Shannon Brooks, who's a bruiser, or are you going to take Dalton Sneed, who can outrun you to the corner of the end zone, like we've seen him do a couple times over the past couple of weeks. But with how efficient this offense is, they can beat you through the air as well. So when you look at the wide receiver group of this offense, any IFL offense, usually they have like two wide receivers that are like, okay, that guy's good. But then the third or fourth one's like, all right, he has his moments. This wide receiver group that Arizona has, they have four very, very viable wide receivers in this group. They got Jamal Miles, they got Corey Reed Jr., they got Niger Jackson, and then they got Glenn Gibbons. So Miles, 69 catches for 689 yards, 16 touchdowns. Corey Reed Jr., 46 catches for 655 yards and 15 touchdowns. Niger Jackson, 42 catches for 553 yards, 9 touchdowns. Glenn Gibbons Jr., 44 catches, 532 yards, 12 touchdowns. So they're not just force feeding one receiver constantly. They're spreading the ball all throughout this group. And Shannon Brooks gets involved with the wide receiver game as well. So they got 5 offensive weapons outside of Dalton Sneed that can get involved in the offense and potentially be the guy on any given day. Like I mentioned earlier, Dalton Sneed got hurt early on in the season in game one, and Arizona had a trio of quarterbacks that they kind of went through during their first 6, 7 games of the season, including Dalton Sneed, Lorenzo Brown Jr., and Garrett Kettle. So on paper, the individual stats don't really jump off the page for Sneed. You look at his stats on goifl.com, you're like, all right, that's pretty good. Not like he was last year with Bay Area, but pretty good, pretty efficient with the ball. But then when you look at the Rattlers as a team, they were fourth in the league as a team passing and nearly had 3,000 yards passing and 60 passing touchdowns as a collective unit. And that's with 3 different quarterbacks in the mix. So that's super impressive. And you got to give a little tip of the cap to Kevin Guy and what he's been able to do with that offense, and continue to let things develop and grow throughout the season. And fix what was broken early on and just go on an absolute tear to end it. The defense has been very opportunistic as well. Dillian Winfrey, he was activated off the injured reserve in May, and this defense has 21 interceptions on the year. So you have a dynamic offense who's very efficient, plus a defense that can create turnovers and give the ball right back to that offense. This Arizona Rattlers team, they're a very, very solid team on both sides of the ball, but it wasn't like that all year. When we're talking about the weaknesses of this Arizona Rattlers team, their rushing defense at the very beginning of the year was horrendous. Very, very bad. We're talking giving up over 100 rushing yards per game bad during that first 4 or 5 weeks of the season. And eventually it got better as the season went on. They ended the season only averaging 88, but that's still towards the bottom of the league as a collective season. So that just shows how bad they started. They were just getting gashed for big yardage all up and down the field early on, but they made some roster moves. They made some personnel adjustments, and they were able to get it cleaned up a little bit. But that's still a weakness for them. And when you look at the strength of Massachusetts, it's their running back, Jimmy Robinson. It's their running game, and they're able to feed him the ball and get him in space. So when you pair the strength of the Massachusetts Pirates in their running game versus the weakness of this Arizona Rattlers defense in their rushing defense, that's not a good matchup for the Arizona Rattlers. And so when it comes to figuring out who's going to come out on top, my pick is the Massachusetts Pirates. I didn't believe in them heading into the playoffs, but they've made me a believer, especially after running back some of the tape from their first or their two playoff games against the Fighters and the Blizzard. They've just been unbelievable, and I think they have what it takes to control the pace of the game. They're going to have to withstand Dalton Sneed and that dynamic Arizona Rattlers offense, but I think the Massachusetts Pirates are going to go over to Vegas and I think they're going to pull it off. So I think the final score is going to be 48-42. And so for those in the old betting landscape, Massachusetts plus 4.5, I think is a really great play. But I also think the over is a good play as well. This Massachusetts offense is getting hot at the right time, like I said, and this Arizona offense can score points in bunches. It's just a matter of how well they pair up physically with this Massachusetts secondary. So I think the game's going to start off a little bit slow and on the low scoring end, but I think we're going to see a lot of dynamic passes in the third and fourth quarter specifically, and we're going to see the scoreboard light up a bit. But I think Massachusetts wins this one, and they win the rematch of the IFL National Championship in 2021. But full disclaimer, I've been horrendous with my picks, just absolutely awful with my picks in the playoffs. So I'm either about to right the ship or I'm about to sink the pirate season. I don't know. It's one or the other. So either way, it's going to be an exciting game and a really great matchup to end the IFL and arena football season and the first kind of full official season of Off the Wall. So super excited to see the game and see how it comes to an end. Now, before we get out of here, I do want to talk about something that happened in the IFL world earlier this week, and it involves the Green Bay Blizzard. So, as we talked about in the preview, the Blizzard got absolutely run over in the Eastern Conference Championship. The Pirates came into Green Bay, they smacked them around, dominated them for 4 quarters, and really shut them down on defense. And I did a full breakdown of that last week, so I'm not going to get into the specifics of the game. Go watch the episode 17 with Jared Harrington if you want to check that out and see how that game played out if you haven't already. But what I wanted to discuss today was something that happened in a weekly YouTube show that the Blizzard put on their YouTube channel called Strictly Blizness. So first off, it's a really solid show that gives a unique peek behind the curtain when it comes to running an IFL team. They're very transparent and honest with how things are done. They joke around about sometimes breaking news that they shouldn't be breaking about the league or the team just because they're excited to share it with the fan base. And they provide a lot of context with like why things are done the way that they are. So it's been really enlightening as a fan of the sport and of the league to see the show and to kind of get an idea of of how a team like this operates and some of the things that they gotta like they're already planning ahead for 2025. Like they touched on a handful of things that they're already planning for next season with game balls, with a new turf system that they got coming to town. So it's super interesting to see how they're try to live in the moment of their best season ever, but also planning ahead. So it's a great show to check out. But all that being said, the owner has a tendency to talk a little too much sometimes and really paint herself in a poor light, which is what happened this past week. So here's what she said on the show.
But Massachusetts does what Massachusetts does, and they got in their heads. There were a fist that swung at one of our players while they were sharing the field during warm up. So this is all prior to the doors opening, and they got in our guys' heads right out of the gate. And we had warned them all week, guys, don't let it get to you. They play a dirty pool. This is just who they are. It's them as an organization. They do that, and they did it in Frisco the week before. Um, the thug mentality is not what we're looking for in the IFL. Fans who sit near the Mass bench that came up to me to say, wow, that other team, and they had some things to say about how they handle themselves. But the point of the conversation was your guys were great. They walked away from what could have been brawls in the end zone every single time that it came down there. It's going to be Arizona v. Massachusetts. So, you know, I know who I'm rooting for. I'm supposed to root for the East, and it's not I'm upset that they won or beat us. It's I want who wins the championship to be someone that's representative of our league. It should be a great game. It really should. And I hope Arizona keeps their players away from the Massachusetts players, although those guys have a way of infiltrating, just penetrating like little cockroaches. Ooh, this is going south really fast. Am I bitter? Of course I'm bitter.
So there's a lot to unpack there. But we'll kind of go line by line with that. Now, that was only like 2 minutes of a 25-30 minute episode. So she said a lot more than that, not just on the Pirates, but about the future of the Blizzard and the IFL Championship and everything. So again, go watch the full episode, get the full context for yourself. But let's kind of just break this down a little bit. So she says Massachusetts does what Massachusetts does, and they got in their heads. To me, this is a part of sports at multiple levels. Trash talk, confrontation before the game, like it happens. Do we want to see like fighting and fist fighting before the game? Absolutely not. Like we don't want to condone that. We don't want to make that the norm. But these guys are prideful in what they do, so they're gonna be they're gonna be a little bit noisy. Like it wasn't just Massachusetts doing the talking. I can guarantee that. So I understand the frustration, but to drag an entire organization through the mud like that is a pretty damning thing to do, especially when it's run by someone that you claim to like. Like she said in the clip, I like the owner. So it's a weird way to approach it. But then she also says, we had warned them all week, don't let it get to you. They play dirty pool. That's just who they are as an organization. That's who they are. The thug mentality is not what we are looking for in the IFL. So this was the part where I was like, hold on, let me rewind that. Do a little triple tap on the left key on YouTube. I was like, let me rewind that. Did I hear that correctly? That was the craziest part of this whole thing to me. Oftentimes you see certain words get used to describe certain things, and you can't help but think, what are they really trying to say here? Like, what does she mean by that? Um, it's I just don't understand. They pre-recorded it. It wasn't like it was a live show where they was like, oh, it's out there. They pre-recorded it, recorded that, and said, you know what, that's good. Let's send it out there. Like that's just to me, I can't wrap my brain around it. But she continues to say, regarding a conversation with fans that were seated near the visitors bench. But the point of the conversation was, your guys were great. They walked away from what could have been brawls every time they were in the end zone. Not for nothing. I've watched a lot of Blizzard games this year, And there were many instances throughout the season where some Green Bay players were getting a little chippy and playing through the whistle and sometimes after the whistle and getting some unsportsmanlike conduct penalties here and there and John with teams towards the end of the game. So it's not like the Blizzard are totally angels in this situation. Like they've been involved in some dust ups of their own throughout the season, and we're not just talking about on the field. Like if you want to dive into some off the field stuff, you certainly could. You have stuff you can pick from, but it's just the whole thing reads like it's not so fun when the Rabbits got the gun, that type of thing, where Green Bay was just stomping teams all year, then they become the team that gets stomped, and this is the response from the owner. It's a I just don't understand it. Yeah, it's she goes on to say, I hope Arizona keeps their players away from the Massachusetts players. All those guys have a way of infiltrating, penetrating like little cockroaches. Am I bitter? Of course I am bitter. It's just an overall bad look. And like I said, Green Bay is such a great organization, which it wasn't shocking to hear this, but it was very disappointing to hear it at the time that it was said. Um, and the biggest thing for me is that if they had won this game, I guarantee they would not be saying this if they were moving on to the national championship and Massachusetts was going home. I guarantee this would not be the conversation. So this seemed like an owner that was just venting frustration and doing so at the expense of another franchise's reputation. And again, nobody is making them say these things. They pre-recorded this, stopped the recording, took a step back and said, the world needs to hear this. Send it. I I don't understand. Like I don't get it. She mentions multiple times that she wants the winner of the national championship game to be someone who's representative of our league. So does she think the way that she expressed herself and her frustrations with the game are a good representation of the league? Probably, I would hope not. Does she think that calling the Pirates team thugs and cockroaches is a good representation of the league's values that she suddenly values so dearly? I don't I don't think so. I don't know. It's this whole situation is confusing and very easily avoidable, and it just kind of reeks of like sore loserdom, you know? And I read a quote earlier today that said, just because you think you have something to say doesn't mean you should say it. And I just feel like they could have gone without some of those things that she said, and it wouldn't have been a big deal. Like it probably would have flown under the radar. But yeah, it was just, I think the part that's very disappointing is to hear the owner speak like that because, like I said, the Green Bay Blizzard are a very, very well run organization in part to her and what she brings to the table. They seem to do things operationally at a very, very high level. The show itself, strictly business, like I said, is something that I wish a lot more teams did. The peek behind the curtain is nice, and it's good to get some transparency in these smaller leagues because we don't get that with a lot of teams and a lot of leagues. They set the example for this, and I applaud them for being as consistent with it as they are. They've got a new turf system coming next season, which is huge. The entire IFL seems to be leveling up their turf, and it's just becoming a better presentation visually for the people watching at home. They seem to have a really good grasp of the economics and logistics of running an IFL team. They've developed a loyal fan base that they were finally able to deliver a really, really great season to. They had the best record in the league, and it's unfortunate the way the season ended, but it's even more unfortunate the way it kind of unraveled over the past week or so. I'll be really interested to see how they follow up on that. I have a feeling that they'll end up doubling down on it, but only time will tell. But like I said, Green Bay is a very, very well-run organization. It was just super disappointing to see that video and to see how it kind of unfolded like that. So that's the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Like I said, it's a shorter one. So Massachusetts plus 4.5 and the over. Those are my picks for the IFL National Championship game. It's going to be a fun one. Be sure to tune in and be sure it's going to be on CBS Sports. So go check it out, tweet about it, throw it on your Instagram story, give the IFL some love and some public exposure for it. So it's going to be a fun game. It's going to be a really fantastic ending to a roller coaster of an arena football season as an arena football community as a whole. The IFL season was really, really great and was something that we needed some consistency. We got it from the IFL. So big props to Todd Tryon and the entire league for delivering a really great season. And we're looking forward to see how the finale matches up. We've seen some really, really great game of the year, some certified bangers. Will this one be another one? I don't know. We'll see. Take care. Have a great rest of your week. Enjoy the game. Enjoy the weekend. We'll see you next time.